We're going to look next at biotechnology and agriculture. A lot of what we're going to look at here is genetic engineering, so transferring those genes from one organism to another. And mainly what we're doing with this is improving nutrition in the plants, or their growth, or their yield, their production. And other ones that we're looking at are things like increasing their ability to withstand drought, things like that. We looked at in chapter 10 corn. So this is the ancestral corn, that teosinte, small hard kernels, and then modern corn. And how did we do this? We used that traditional breeding, that idea of finding those kernels that were bigger and those ears that had more of the kernels on them, saving those seeds, using them to plant again in the future, and doing that over and over and over again. That took, hundreds to thousands of years, depending on what plant we're working on or animal. However, biotechnology can help us do these sorts of things in a fraction of the time. Especially today, we're talking maybe 10, 15, at most 20 years when we can put a new crop on the market. So let's take a look at some of these. So the first one is, how might a genetically modified plant help 500 malnourished people? The thing is that most people aren't really aware of this, but in the world, about 5 million people, mainly children, are actually suffering from vitamin A deficiency, which actually causes blindness. So there are people in the world who are blind just because they can't get enough vitamin A. And this is especially common in Southeast Asia and sub-Saharan Africa, so, below the Saharan desert, because rice is the main part of their diet. And rice doesn't contain a lot of, nutrition other than starch. It's got a few other vitamins and so forth, and it definitely doesn't contain any of the components for vitamin A. Vitamin A comes from what kinds of fruits and vegetables? Specifically, there's one vegetable that you might be familiar with. If you were growing up, you were probably told to eat this vegetable to help your eyesight. Yeah, things like carrots. So anything that has like an orange color to it, like carrots, beets contain some of the beta carotene, and then also greens. So like collard greens and spinach and so forth also contain this beta carotene that's turned into vitamin A. Those are not things that are commonly found in diets in those regions of the world where this vitamin A deficiency shows up. So that's where this golden rice comes in. This is a genetically engineered crop that's been worked on and is now in field testing in a couple of countries. So what is golden rice? Well, golden rice is genetically engineered so that it contains beta carotene. Beta carotene is the precursor to vitamin A. And so your body takes beta carotene and turns it into vitamin A for you to use. So what researchers did, they took the white rice genome and they introduced the gene from a daffodil and a gene set from bacteria. And these two gene sets together, when they're pasted into the white rice genome, are going to produce the necessary proteins and components to make beta carotene. So therefore we end up with golden rice. It has that kind of yellow orange color to it that other crops and so forth that contain beta carotene have. And the thing is that this now has almost 25 times the amount of beta carotene in it that white rice did. Now, in a Western diet like ours, that doesn't seem significant. However, when rice is a majority of your diet, that will actually get you enough beta carotene in your diet to make up for a vitamin A deficiency. Now, this first golden rice was developed in 1999. That one didn't have as much beta carotene in it, but the ones today do have this 25 times, and they are now underway, like I said, being grown in a couple of different countries. So one thing we can do, we can increase nutrition. The thing is when farmers are growing plants, they have problems. You may be able to identify what these guys are in this picture. These are caterpillars of some type, a larva of a beetle, or a caterpillar of a butterfly or a moth, and they are munching away. So farmers have problems with all kinds of pests. So what kinds of pests are you familiar with that farmers have problems with as far as them eating their crops? So there's all kinds of things, right? So there's beetles, there's aphids, there's ants, lots and lots of things like to eat plants, especially, it turns out, the plants that we like to eat. And so the problem is that insects have built up resistance to our traditional methods of dealing with them. Our traditional methods are using things like insecticides, chemicals. And as we learned during the evolution chapter, you spray, a pesticide, an insecticide, and you'll kill most of them. But if you can't kill them all the first time, some of them survive because they have that resistance to that pesticide. And you keep repeating the process until you end up with kind of what you might call super bugs or super insects. And that means that your insecticide no longer works. So there have been crops that are genetically engineered to help with this. In fact, there are a lot of our crops that have been genetically engineered to help with this. Most of us consume genetically modified foods without realizing it. So you can see here, this is showing you the proportion of crops grown in the United States that are genetically modified or genetically engineered and are not. And you can see corn and soybeans, 93% of those two crops are genetically modified, and 86% of our corn is genetically modified. So what is it being modified for? And the thing is that unless you're getting organic cotton, the cotton in your clothing is going to be genetically modified. Most of our food stuffs that we eat directly are generally not genetically modified. A lot of them won't be marked that anymore. But who eats the 86% and the 93% if we don't eat it? Who's eating all of that? Livestock, right? So our cows and our chickens and our pigs and so forth are eating this genetically modified food, which then we in turn eat them. So indirectly, we are still eating genetically modified food. So we are consuming this. So how is this working? How can genetically modifying these plants help farmers? Well, one of the ways that those specific crops have been helping is reducing pesticide use. So how is that working? Well, this is what happens with those sorts of crops. So you've got corn and it's getting munched on by some sort of insect pest. What has happened is we have discovered that there is this, what we call Bt crystal. It's an insecticide, turns out, that a bacterium called Bacillus thuringiensis makes as part of its defense mechanisms. And so we have gone in and we've cut out the Bt crystal gene that is used to make that crystal out of the bacteria. And through a process in genetic engineering, we've given that gene to things like corn and soybeans and cotton, so that now the plant cells are actually making this Bt crystal. So what they're doing is they're making their own insecticides. So the plant itself, in the leaves that it's got, are making these Bt crystals that when the insects munch on them, they either are toxic to them or discourage them from eating them, depending on the type of insect. And since the plants can protect themselves, that means that farmers don't have to spray as much or any of their insecticides out on their crops. And it reduces that damage by the insects. There are some signs that there's some resistance showing up in some insects for this Bt crystal, but it's not showing up as fast as, say, resistance to our regular insecticides. The other thing that can be done with this process, instead of inserting just the Bt crystal gene, we can also insert a gene to protect our crops against herbicide. And so why might we want to do that? Well, we can put in these herbicide resistance genes that we found from bacteria that protect the plants from herbicides. What do herbicides do? Herbicides kill plants, right? And we're using them generally to kill plants like weeds that we don't want in the field that could compete with our crop. But we can also not just give the plants the ability to fight insects by making their own insecticides, but we can give them protection against the herbicides. So that way, when we spray herbicides on the field, it doesn't kill our crop plants. It will only kill the weeds that we want to target. And so that allows for a little bit easier use of that herbicide as far as targeting those weeds. So we can protect plants from herbicides so that we can use it on the fields. We can increase their nutrition. We can also use this genetic engineering or genetic modification to be able to allow them to make their own insecticide. And we also have been using this not just in plants, but now in animals. This picture is of the first animal that was approved for market, and it is a salmon. This is the genetically engineered or genetically modified salmon, and this is a farm-raised salmon. They're the same species of salmon, and these two salmon are the same age. So these two salmon are about 18 months old, and you can see there's a large difference in their size. So what is it that's going on? Well, this salmon up here has two genes in it that help it get bigger. One of them is a gene that functions year-round to help it grow. And so normally the gene is only turned on during the summer, but this one, it's turned on year-round so that it increases its growth all the time. And the other gene is actually helping as far as processing their food. So it's more efficient at processing food than the regular farm salmon. So it does work as far as increasing. And when these two were put in through taste tests, there wasn't any difference between the two. So people couldn't tell the genetically modified one apart from the farm-raised one. There is a downside to these guys, and that has to do with the same sort of thing that we have with CRISPR, and that is what happens if these genetically engineered, genetically modified salmon make it out into a wild population. And, you know, we're still working on trying to figure that one out, because it's inevitable that they will actually escape, because they are in captivity, but we've had accidents before where other organisms like invasive organisms like the silver carp or Asian carp have escaped that weren't supposed to. So what happens when these guys escape? Because these guys grow 500% faster than the uh, regular salmon. And so will they outcompete the natural salmon, or, what will happen?